From trade to territory, the East India Company establishes power. The East India Company had the unusual distinction of ruling an entire country. Its origins were much humbler. In December 1600, a group of merchants who had incorporated themselves into the East India Company were given monopoly privilege from the ruler of England, Queen Elizabeth I, granting it the sole right to trade with the East Indies. The Royal Charter, however, could not prevent other European powers from entering the eastern markets. The East India Company faced stiff competition in the face of already established Portuguese in the western coast of India. Dutch and French traders too were exploring the possibilities of trade in the Indian Ocean, all aimed at exclusive quality of cotton and silk produced in India along with the trade for spices. The company's first ships arrived in India at the port of Surat in 1608. Sir Thomas Roe reached the court of the Mughal Emperor Jahangir as the emissary of King James I in 1615 and gained for the British the right to establish a factory at Surat. By 1696, it began building a fort around the settlement. Gradually, the British eclipsed the Portuguese, and over the years they saw a massive expansion of the trading operations in India. Numerous trading posts were established along the east and the west coast of India, and considerable English communities developed around the three presidency towns of Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. The East India Company begins trade in Bengal. In 1717, the company achieved its hitherto most notable success when it received a farman or the royal diktat from the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb exempting the company from the payment of custom duties in Bengal. This led to an enormous loss of revenue for Bengal, which brought the East India Company in conflict with the Nawabs of Bengal. The Battle of Plassey. Through the early 18th century, the conflict between the company and the Nawabs of Bengal intensified. After the death of Aurangzeb, the Bengal Nawabs asserted their power and autonomy. Murshid Quli Khan was followed by Alivardi Khan and then Siraj-ud-Dawla as the Nawab of Bengal. The Nawabs denied all the trading grants to East India Company and demanded large tributes for company of trade to Bengal. Further, they restricted the company from minting coins and fortification in their territories. The East India Company, on the other hand, refused to obey the Nawabs as they felt their demands were highly unjustified. Company was also convinced that to expand trade, it had to enlarge its settlements, buy up villages and rebuild its forts. The conflicts led to confrontations and finally culminated in the famous Battle of Plassey. Robert Clive, the official of the East India Company, defeated the forces of the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dawla, at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. After this battle, the company saw the rise of its fortunes and its transformation from a trading venture to a ruling enterprise. One of the main reasons of the defeat of the Nawab in the Battle of Plassey was the betrayal by his own commander, Mir Jafar, who was given a title of Nawab by Clive after the defeat of Siraj-ud-Dawla. The company for few years followed diplomatic strategies of expanding their trade with the help of the puppet Nawabs or rulers. But with due course of time, they realized that it was difficult. After defeating their puppet Nawab, who rebelled against the company in the battle at Buxar in 1764, the company realized that working with puppet rulers had its own limitations. They wanted more money to finance its wars and meet the demands of trade and its other expenses. It wanted more territories and more revenue. Diwani rights of the Bengal provinces. Finally, in 1765, the company succeeded in acquiring from the Mughal Emperor the Diwani rights of the provinces of Bengal. These rights allowed the company to use the vast revenue resources of Bengal. This solved a major problem that the company had earlier faced, which was that though from the early 18th century, company trade with India had expanded, but it had to buy most of the goods in India with gold and silver imported from Britain. This was because at this time, Britain had no goods to sell in India. The outflow of gold from Britain slowed after the Battle of Plassey and entirely stopped after the assumption of the Diwani. Now, revenues from India could finance company expenses. These revenues could be used to purchase cotton and silk textiles in India, maintain company troops, and meet the cost of building the company fort and offices at Calcutta. The initial years of company's administration were calamitous for the people of Bengal and left the formerly rich province in a state of utter destitution. The company, however, despite the increase in trade and revenues coming in from other sources, found itself still burdened with massive military expenditures, and its destruction seemed imminent. State intervention put the ailing company back on its feet, and Lord North's India Bill, also known as the Regulating Act of 1773, provided for greater parliamentary control over the affairs of the company, besides placing India under the rule of a Governor General. The first Governor General of India was Warren Hastings. Under his dispensation, the expansion of the British rule in India was pursued vigorously, and the British sought to master indigenous systems of knowledge. Subsidiary alliance versus residents. After the Battle of Buxar, the company appointed residents in Indian states. They were political or commercial agents, and their jobs was to serve and further the interests of the company. The company forced the states into a subsidiary alliance which restricted the state to maintain their own army. They were to be protected by the company but had to pay for the subsidiary forces that the company was supposed to maintain for the purpose of this protection. If the Indian rulers failed to make the payment, then part of the territory was taken away as penalty. The Nawab of Awadh and Hyderabad and many other states lost their territories to the company under this alliance. Company rule expands. From the late 18th century, the company pursued an aggressive policy of territorial expansion. Warren Hastings remained in India until 1784 and was succeeded by Cornwallis, who initiated the permanent settlement, whereby an agreement in perpetuity was reached with the zamindars or landlords for the collection of revenue. For the next 50 years, the British were engaged in attempts to eliminate Indian rivals, and it is under the administration of Wellesley that British territorial expansion was achieved with ruthless efficiency. Major victories were achieved against Tipu Sultan of Mysore and the Marathas, and finally the subjugation and conquest of the Sikhs in a series of Anglo-Sikh wars led to British occupation over the entirety of India. In some places, the British practiced indirect rule, placing a resident at the court of the native ruler who was allowed sovereignty in domestic matters. Anglo-Maratha Wars. With the gradual weakening of the Marathas in the aftermath of the three Anglo-Maratha Wars, the British also secured the Ganga-Jamuna Doab, the Delhi-Agra region, parts of Bundelkhand, Browach, some districts of Gujarat, the fort of Ahmednagar, province of Cuttack, Bombay, the surrounding areas, leading to a formal end of the Maratha Empire and firm establishment of the British East India Company in India. Anglo-Mysore Wars. Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, the rulers of the Kingdom of Mysore, offered much resistance to the British forces. Having sided with the French during the Revolutionary War, the rulers of Mysore continued their struggle against the company with the four Anglo-Mysore Wars. Mysore finally fell to the company forces in the Battle of Seringapatnam in 1799 with the death of Tipu Sultan. The last vestiges of local administration were restricted to the northern regions of Delhi, Oudh, Rajputana and Punjab, where the company's presence was ever increasing amidst infighting and offers of protection among the remaining princes. The 100 years from the Battle of Plassey in 1757 to the Indian Rebellion of 1857 were a period of consolidation for the company, which began to function more as an administrator and less as a trading concern. Doctrine of Lapse. Lord Dalhousie's notorious doctrine of lapse, whereby a native state became part of British India if there was no male heir at the death of the ruler, was one of the principal means by which native states were annexed. But often the annexation, such as that of Awadh in 1856, was justified on the grounds that the native prince was of evil disposition, indifferent to the welfare of his subjects. The annexation of native states, harsh revenue policies, and the plight of the Indian peasantry all contributed to the rebellion of 1858, referred to previously as the Sepoy Mutiny. In 1858, the East India Company was dissolved, despite a valiant defense of its purported achievements by John Stuart Mill, and the administration of India became the responsibility of the Crown. Summary: in December 1600, the East India Company was given monopoly privileges from the ruler of England, Queen Elizabeth I, granting it sole rights to trade with the East Indies. In 1615, Sir Thomas Roe gained for the British the right to establish a factory at Surat from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. In 1717, the company acquired a royal firman from Aurangzeb, acquiring free trade rights in Bengal. The East India Company defeated the forces of the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dawla, at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. In 1765, the company succeeded in acquiring from the Mughal Emperor the Diwani rights of the provinces of Bengal. These rights allowed the company to use the vast revenue resources of Bengal. Lord North's India Bill, or the Regulating Act of 1773, provided for greater parliamentary control over the affairs of the company, besides placing India under the rule of a Governor General. The first Governor General of India was Warren Hastings. The company forced the states into a subsidiary alliance which restricted the state to maintain their own army. The company pursued an aggressive policy of territorial expansion. Anglo-Maratha Wars and the Anglo-Mysore Wars are an example. Lord Dalhousie's notorious doctrine of lapse, whereby a native state became part of British India if there was no male heir at the death of the ruler. In 1858, the East India Company was dissolved, and the administration of India became the responsibility of the Crown.